Hello, my name is Jan Jones, class of 1969, and I'm a Sweetbriar woman.
So what did you study here at Sweetbriar?
I studied mathematics. I was a math major at Sweetbriar.
And what did you do with your degree after graduation?
Well, I thought my internships in the summer through college were in banks and in businesses, and I thought I would go into business. But I married a teacher, and in 1969 there was a shortage of math teachers in the United States. And so when we were married and moved to Atlanta, I was asked to teach, and I thought, well, it might be interesting to try it. And I tried it, and I loved it. So I became a teacher.
And did you stick with that? Did that become your lifelong career?
It did. It actually did. I went back to graduate school. I got a master's, an MAT, a Master's of Art in Teaching Mathematics. And I taught mathematics on every level from 3rd grade through junior college in different places that we lived, different locations, different jobs. So, yes.
Do you believe that attending a women's college like Sweetbriar helped you in this career choice?
I would say attending a women's college helped me in my career in general. I think it gave me the confidence, and it gave me the knowledge that I could go out in the world and do anything I wanted to do. And I did. And so the fact that I sort of changed gears after I graduated really didn't faze me. Sweetbriar had done a great job, because when I was a student, I don't know if they still do this, but when I was a student, you had to take the GREs. And I thought that was a waste of time, because I had no intention of going to graduate school. And however, I had no choice. I had to take the GREs. So 6 months after I graduated, when I decided to go into teaching and realized that I would need accreditation, I'd need the education courses in order to get my certificate, I thought, well, I might as well just go ahead and have them count toward a master's. And oh, guess what? I've already taken the GREs, and all I have to do is contact Sweetbriar and have them send my scores to graduate schools. And it made applying to graduate schools very easy. So I think being at Sweetbriar in particular, because of their requirements at the time, it was really a benefit.
Do you think you could tell us a little bit about things that you did at Sweetbriar outside of academics?
Mm-hmm. When I was a student at Sweetbriar, we ate family style and opened glass dining hall because the student body had grown to the point where we didn't all fit into the refectory, which is now the Pannell Gallery. So there were 2 dining halls, but we all ate family style, so there were waitresses. And when I was a student here, I was a waitress. So I waited 2 meals a day, every day. And one of those meals had to be dinner. The other one could be breakfast or lunch. And because I'm an early riser, and because all the math classes were in the morning, I always chose to wait breakfast and dinner. So that was sort of my main focus when I was on campus. And then on the weekends, most of the time I was in either Lexington or then Charlottesville after I met my husband.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier that you were here during the time that Mrs. Pannell was president of our college, and of course we're here today because this is funded through the Pannell Scholarship. We were wondering if you could talk about her a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I'd be happy to. She was a petite lady, and she, we mostly saw her from afar. To my knowledge, she never taught a class, but she would come to the dining hall upon occasion and eat in the dining hall with us. I was here after her sons were grown, but she actually came as a young widow with 2 small boys, and she raised her boys here at Sweetbriar House. She was a true visionary for her time. It was thanks to Mrs. Pannell that we were able to integrate the college and do it as smoothly and seamlessly as we did. The courts had ruled that in the early 60s that they could not go against the will that stated the school was for white women, but Mrs. Pannell decided, because of the era and what was happening in the country and the times, it was time to integrate. And so she actually saw to it that the first black woman came to Sweetbriar, and we were just very easily integrated. There was no upset or resistance once Marshall and Jurgen was here.
So your husband, President Jones, recommended that we ask you what you remember most about here being at Sweetbriar.
Oh, what do I remember most? Well, most of all, when I think of Sweetbriar, I think of, first of all, an exquisite environment. And second of all, I think of a community of very caring people. And the friendships that I made here have been lifelong. So it's just wonderful to be back. It feels very much like home. You're gonna make me cry.
So do you get to see your Sweetbriar sisters often now?
Yes, it was interesting when we first graduated and we were busy with our careers and busy raising children. We didn't get together as often as we do now, but now we realize how important it is to get together. We try to make a point of doing that on a regular basis, at least once a year, if not more often. So, reunion was great. I was just back for reunion last May, and it was terrific to see everybody. We had a really good time.
I suppose one day we'll be attending reunions too.
You absolutely, and you will remember these days, and you will think how ideal they were. There was a professor when I was a student here at the University of Virginia, and he used to take me aside and he used to say, "You know, Sweetbriar isn't the real world." And I would go, "Yeah, but isn't it a wonderful world?" And I used to think, what a privilege to be able to spend a year, 2 years, 4 years here. Yes, of course you don't have the problems at Sweetbriar that you have in New York City or in a large metropolitan area, but that's okay. It's beautiful here. It's a wonderful life, and you are able to establish a community here that you can't do in a larger urban environment. So I think it's just a wonderful thing to experience, and I think for the professors who spend their careers here, how fortunate are they?
Truly is a privilege to be here. You mentioned earlier that you felt as though the requirements here at Sweetbriar allowed you to prepare well for graduate school. Mm-hmm. Did you feel more or less prepared compared to your colleagues upon graduation? I was definitely more prepared. When I started graduate school, it was very easy for me. I didn't realize how well prepared I was until I started graduate school and saw the other students struggling, and it wasn't a struggle for me at all. So it was interesting to see that, because you never really know until you get out in the world into another environment. You never really know how prepared you are, and I was definitely well prepared. I'd like to think our college still prepares people very well.
When you ask me about my memories here, so many of the traditions have continued. Steps. I think there's going to be lantern bearing in the spring, isn't there? Oh. Yeah, I'm anxious to see that, because, step singing brought back a lot of memories. Walking to Monument Hill brought back a lot of memories. there are some new traditions. We didn't have the Christmas tree and the singing around the tree and the quiet at Christmas time, especially with the horses. That was really impressive. What we did have, because we had exams after Christmas, we all left the same day for Christmas break. And one of my fondest memories are the Sweet Tones, who walked through all the dorms starting at about 4 a.m. As we were getting up and getting packed and getting ready to leave campus. They walked through all the dorms singing Christmas carols on the days that we left. We had a mandatory class before and after every vacation. So we always pretty much left together and came back together at Thanksgiving and at Christmas and at spring break. So, you know, that was kind of fun because we could still travel by train, and I did. If you came from Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Connecticut, you probably back then traveled to Sweetbriar by train, and so, you know, you'd all troop up to the station. Because it wasn't just Sweetbriar girls, it would be UVA guys and W&L guys, and we'd basically all be going up and coming back about the same time, and so we'd all meet on the train. And I would be coming from New Jersey, so I would get on in either Princeton Junction or Trenton. And then by the time you get to Philadelphia, you pick up a few more kids, and by the time you get to Baltimore, a few more. By the time you get to DC, you've just got a whole ton of kids on the train that you already know. And you ride back to school together. In Sweetbriar, at that point, the station, the little station building that's now on campus, was still over by the railroad tracks. But it wasn't a regular stop, it was a flag stop. So on vacations, before, you know, beginning and end of vacations, they would always arrange for the trains to stop and pick us all up. It was fun. It was really fun. You usually ended up sitting on a suitcase if you didn't get on very early in the trip, but because it was so packed, there were never enough seats. But it was loads of fun, you know. And you could catch up before you even got back to campus. You could catch up with everybody's vacation. Yeah, that's hard. But when I was a student, we weren't allowed to have cars. Oh. That was also something that's changed a lot. Besides our dress code, that's something that's changed a lot too. We were not allowed to have cars until senior year, so there were very few cars on campus. And if you didn't go by train, you went by bus, and that wasn't as much fun.
What was the dress code while you were here?
When I was here, there was a rather stringent dress code, which my class was very proud that we pretty much wore the administration down. And by the early 70s, it was pretty much gone. But when I started here, you could not wear blue jeans outside of the dorm unless they were completely covered by a coat. You had to wear skirts to meals. You had to wear skirts to classes, and dresses or skirts to classes. And so the seniors were allowed to wear their black. We didn't have the decorated senior robes that the students have now. We only had one senior robe, and it was just your straight black senior robe that you wore for graduation. And you got that robe after we fought for the senior stairs. After the junior banquet, we would have a fight for the senior stairs, which are those middle stairs going into Pannell. And once we had taken the stairs from that point on, we were allowed to wear our robes. And basically, the advantage of wearing your robe was that you didn't have to follow the dress code because you could cover any violations with the black robe. So if you came onto campus back in the late 60s, you would have seen about 1 in 4 women walking around campus day in and day out with a black robe on. And that designated that she was a senior. And that was the advantage of being able to wear your senior robe, was the fact that if you, if you had blue jeans on, you didn't have to change them. You could just hike them up and put your robe on and go wherever you wanted to go. If you didn't have a skirt on for dinner, if you had shorts on, or you had pants on. You could pull them up, put your robe on, and go to dinner. You didn't have to change. And so we really, not only did we love that privilege, but we really used it. We really took advantage of it.
It's rather ingenious.
Yes, and then my sister came, she graduated in '82. By the time she came, the dress code was no longer in effect. Well, the seniors, when we came back from junior banquet was always off campus. And then when you came back to campus after the junior banquet, which is when we got our rings, I think that still happens, doesn't it? Okay. You had to fight for the stairs. And when you came back to campus, the seniors were basically sitting on the stairs to protect them. And we had to basically get the seniors off any way we could other than hurting someone. I mean, obviously, the point was not for anyone to get hurt, but to make it so uncomfortable for the seniors that they abandoned the stairs and allowed us to then take the senior stairs. And so we used everything at our means, including water, quite a bit of water, water balloons, water coming out of bottles. Let's see, what else did we use? You know, there was the occasional, you know, move in and let's pick these girls up and move them, but never in the way that anyone got hurt. And then eventually, after they felt we had paid our dues, the seniors abandoned the stairs and allowed us to win them. Not have the rock. We had a tree, but the tree I think is gone. We had the hitching post. We did have the hitching post. And it was not in the location it's in now. It actually was around the corner, kind of at the foot of the bell tower. But we were trying, at reunion, we were trying to remember, because we had the bench, absolutely, we had the stairs, we had the hitching post, and we kept saying, what was the other thing? Because it wasn't a rock, and it was an oak tree. And I think it's not there any longer. Yeah, it must have died or something. I don't know. But there was no parking on the quad when I was a student here. Even faculty, no one parked on the quad. I don't remember a lot of freshman-sophomore rivalry. We kind of had when we came, the sophomores were our big sisters at orientation. So we actually got to be pretty close with the sophomore class. I don't know if they have any of that anymore, do they?
We have junior freshman siblings. Sort of like.
Oh, you have juniors for your like big sisters?
Yeah, I believe the reason they do that now is because when you come in as a freshman, you have the junior, and then you have her again for her second year, and by the time you're a junior, you get your own little sister, so it kind of is a cycle. Okay,
when I was here, each dorm had girls from 2 classes, and I happened to be in Manson, which my freshman year was a freshman-junior dorm. So we got to know some juniors because we lived in the same dorm. Not in the, obviously the rooms were not mixed. Your roommate was someone from your class. But in other rooms in the dorm, there were juniors. Some of the dorms, like Glass, were freshman, sophomore dorms. So in that way, you did get to know a few girls from other classes. But the real partner class when I was a student here were the sophomores, were our big sisters, and the sophomores were the ones who were on campus during orientation when we first came and you know, sort of took us under their wing and everything. It seemed like the juniors and seniors were kind of up there on a pedestal, you know. Wow. We just aspired to be like the juniors and seniors.
How large was your class?
My class, when we started, was somewhere in the range of 250 girls. And I just learned recently that 125 of us graduated. So it was quite, I was surprised that my actual graduating class wasn't larger. It seemed, you know, it seemed to me that more of the girls I started with did graduate, I guess because the women that I became close friends with all stayed and graduated. So I was kind of surprised that it had dropped off that much, but I can't argue with the statistics. They gave me the numbers, so I'm sure they're right.
Were you in any of the clubs?
I was not. I was not in any of the tap clubs. We didn't have as many when I was a student here, and we can look at an old yearbook to see what we did have. There are way more tap clubs now than there were when I was here, and it was pretty much, you know, you had to have kind of a special interest or a special talent, like to be in the, if you were in the Sweet Tones, you had to be invited into the Sweet Tones. That was a really good voice. And so, no, I wasn't in any of the tap clubs. I tell people I was in the waitressing tap club. We were kind of a little group unto ourselves. Although some of those girls were obviously in other clubs too, but it wasn't unusual not to be in a club when I was here. In fact, I think probably there were more of us not in any of the tap clubs than girls that were in tap clubs. I think it's gotten to be sort of a more important thing. I don't know. We did. We had formals. We had mixers at the beginning of the year with some of the men's colleges. When I was a student here, all of the all of the men's colleges were men's colleges. Gee, that's a profound statement, isn't it? All of the colleges in Virginia were single-sex, including the University of Virginia, which was all men. And Washington and Lee was all men. Hampton-Sydney was all men. And then there were the women's colleges, Sweet Briar, Hollins, Mary Washington, and so forth. And so we would have mixers with different men's colleges, freshman year especially, freshman mixers. Here on our campus, the men would come here. Then there was a winter formal, always a winter formal. And then we had something called May Day, which was the spring formal. And May Day was a whole weekend of celebration where we had a May Queen and her court, and she was crowned. And we would have, you know, a big name musical group come and perform on campus. And then the next night there'd be a big formal, and it was sort of a whole weekend of activities at the beginning of May.
Did you meet Mr. Jones at a mixer?
I did not, no. I met him through a mutual friend. Our sophomore year, he was dating one of my friends here at Sweetbriar, and I was dating one of his friends at the University of Virginia. And we kind of met in a group. You know, we all hung out together. And then when we came back to school, our junior year, the girl that he had been dating at Sweetbriar did not come back. She had left, and he asked me if I'd like to go out, and I said sure. And we were together from then on.
Here you are today.
And here we are today. So he knew Sweetbriar very well, and he was in a group called the Virginia Gentlemen, which is their a cappella group, and the Virginia Gentlemen and the Virginia Glee Club did some concerts periodically with the Sweetbriar Glee Club and the Sweet Tones. So they would perform together from time to time. I don't know if we ever went up there, but I know the men came down here. So that was always fun. I mean, VMI had, well, I have to say when I was a student, I mean, the poor cadets of VMI, I don't think they ever let them leave campus. They had almost no freedom whatsoever. So we didn't interact very much with VMI, not because we didn't like the VMI guys, and holy crow, their uniforms are great. They were never allowed to leave campus. You know, there just wasn't an opportunity to meet them. I think, was there a stereotype with the men's colleges? That's an interesting question. You know, I felt like probably UVA guys were a little more intellectual than W&L guys. We didn't interact with Hampton-Sydney as much as Sweetbriar does now. I think Hampton Sydney would have been more like W now, you know, more fun guys. And UVA were more, you know, serious student intellectual type guys. But there's always exceptions because Virginia has plenty of rousing fraternity parties and fraternity guys as well. And among the larger institutions nationally, UVA had a real party reputation. So, you know, maybe that's not valid, but it seemed that way to me.
Was it common for the women to visit other colleges, or did men more so?
Yes, it was very common, and we had, in fact, that was what mostly happened. We mostly left campus and went to the men's schools on the weekends for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was because there was more happening in those places. I mean, that was part of it. There wasn't as much to do here on campus. Keep in mind, we didn't have cars. And so, you know, we would all, who's going to W&L this weekend and how can we carpool and get there kind of thing. So if guys came here, they either had to have cars, and a lot of the guys didn't have cars. I mean, you know, it's just, people just didn't, it was expensive and people didn't have cars the way they do now. We had approved housing, which meant that if we were going to any of the schools in Virginia, we had to stay with a person who was approved by Sweetbriar, and basically they had a list of predominantly little old ladies who had extra rooms that they would rent out on the weekends to girls. You've probably heard of this approved housing for, I think it was $1.25 a night when I started, and it went up to $2 a night by the time I was a senior. And you got a clean room and a clean bathroom and breakfast the next morning. And you had to, if you were going to go visit one of the men's colleges, your date had to call you by Tuesday, Wednesday morning at the absolute latest. And they had to plan ahead. And once you had an invitation to go to one of the men's colleges, you had to fill out a form and you had to file it with, well, first of all, you had to find a place to stay. So you had to call one of the ladies on the approved housing list and be sure she had room for you for the weekend. Then you had to fill out a form that said who you were going to go see, when you were going to go, how you were going to get there, where you were going to stay, and you had to file that with the Dean of Students office, and you had to get approval before you could leave campus, which they would not guarantee approval in less than 24 hours. So if you wanted to leave on a Friday, you had to really pretty much get that request in by Wednesday or Thursday morning at the absolute latest in order to have your approval to leave campus. So you really had to plan ahead. And then in each dorm, if you were leaving campus for any reason, even just to go into Lynchburg to shop, you had to sign out. And there was a book at every door, in every dorm, and you had to sign out. You had to say when you were leaving the dorm, where you were going, when you expected to come back. So even if you were going for the weekend, you had to sign out so that they could find you in an emergency. So it was, yeah, there was definitely pre-planning that had to go into things. Nothing really was spontaneous. Unless a guy came down and surprised you, and that would have been a real surprise.
Were they allowed to do that?
Oh, sure, they were allowed to do that. They didn't, but they were only allowed to do it during certain hours. And after, I think it was 11 o'clock on weeknights, it might have been 10 o'clock, 10 or 11 o'clock on weeknights, and 12 or 1 on the weekends. And after that time, all men had to be off campus. And if they weren't, they were escorted off campus by the security guys who were Pinkertons when I was a student, by the Pinkerton men. So, yes, so if somebody came down and surprised you, that was great, and that was fun. But, you know, they couldn't stay, unless you had made arrangements ahead of time with someone like a professor for your date to stay with them. We had something called the date house, which the building still exists. It's down at the Circle when you come in. Part of that building had evidently been used to house dates, but the only time men stayed over were really the big weekends, and there were way more men here than could, you know, than that building would accommodate. So they no longer housed guys there when I was a student here. They had a little, what would you call it? They had like a little soda fountain in that building, and they sold a few toiletries, a few necessities if you got caught, because as I said, it was very hard to get off campus to buy things. You pretty much brought everything you needed to campus when you came from home. But on big weekends, there were ladies in Amherst, and I guess guys rented hotel rooms. I don't really know. But I do know there were some professors and some ladies in the community who would also rent rooms to the guys on the big weekends here. So they didn't have to go all the way back to college late at night. Because the roads were not what they are now. 29 was a 2-lane road. And it took a lot longer to get to Charlottesville. And it took even longer to get to Hampton-Sydney. So I haven't driven to Washington and Lee since we came back here, so I don't know if that road has improved a lot. But I can tell you 29 has improved a whole lot.
You have so many great stories.
It was fun. It was a fun time to be here. It really was. There was a lot happening in the world. There was a lot of turmoil in the world when we were students, between the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. And it certainly touched us, but no one was burning ROTC buildings in this part of the country. And we didn't have the riots that one of the summers I was a student here, I actually had a summer job in Newark, New Jersey, the summer that they had the riots in Newark. And so, I'm not going to say that I lived in a bubble the whole time I was a student here. I was certainly part of the real world. But after that summer, it was just so wonderful to come back to Central Virginia, where things were relatively calm. And as I've said, Mrs. Pannell managed to integrate the college without any riots and without any demonstrations and without any angst. And she managed to accomplish what the rest of the country was accomplishing, and in some places they weren't accomplishing it smoothly at all. There was great strife. So it really wasn't until I was grown and I kind of started putting all the pieces, all the layers together of the late 60s and early 70s with the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War and the women's movement. Because we were in a women's college. We didn't feel the need to prove ourselves. We were the leaders. We were running the school. Women were running the school. So, it was kind of neat in that regard. So, we left here thinking, well, of course we can do anything we want to do.